Hi, this is Brendan McCarthy, editor of the Boston Globe Spotlight team. And thanks for listening to our podcast here on YouTube. If you want to hear more, can't wait for the next episode, or want to just stay up to date on all things Snitch City, consider subscribing to Spotlight Snitch City on your favorite podcast app. Just follow the link in the description below. Stay tuned, because there's a lot more coming.
Before we begin, this story includes strong language. Please take care when listening.
There is a new top cop in New Bedford tonight. The police department appointing a new chief this afternoon.
This major shift in local law enforcement took place one afternoon in the spring of 2021.
That's right, I'm here in New Bedford, where Mayor John Mitchell just announced there's going to be a change in leadership here at the New Bedford Police Department.
In a portrait-lined room at the New Bedford Public Library, Mayor John Mitchell stepped forward to address the gathered crowd.
I've known this individual for a long time, and I am fully confident that he is up to this job. The leadership of the department, and going forward, will be under Chief Paul Oliveira.
Beside him stood Paul Oliveira.
It takes more courage than ever to wear this badge, and I want to ensure all that I believe in and support the men and women of the department.
Chief Oliveira is handsome. A heftier Matt Damon could play him in a movie. He's in his 50s, but he still looks like he could lead a team of detectives through a drug house door.
Policing has changed dramatically throughout the careers of those of us standing here. We will take the next steps to continue changing with the times and working together to keep the residents of the city of New Bedford safe.
To understand New Bedford's policing problem, and why federal authorities have had their eyes on the department for years, you need to understand Paul Oliveira. To some degree, it started with him, and it only grew from there, at least according to 3 of Oliveira's former colleagues in the drug unit. I talked to more than a dozen other cops who worked for Oliveira. I even talked to one of his former informants. When it comes to speaking on the record, into a microphone, with their names out there, most of them stop short, but not Bobby Richard.
There's a few people that know this stuff about Paul Oliveira right from the womb, right? Who have lived it with him. And I was one of those people.
Richard says he's willing to talk because he's off the force and no longer fears retaliation.
I think that he probably started on day one and said, I want to be the police chief, right? A lot of people don't start on the factory floor and say, I want to be the CEO. But it seemed to me that he had a clear direction in his mind about what he wanted to do, and that was, rising to the top of the profession.
Oliveira first made a name for himself as a headline-generating drug cop. From there, he became a supervisor, then ran internal affairs. He was made deputy chief, then chief. But behind Oliveira's rise to the top, there's a dark backstory.
Back then, he reached a level of invincibility, where he felt like he couldn't be touched. He had become so successful in what he was doing on a daily basis and getting away with it that he became cult-like, invincible, Speak of the devil, there he is.
Who? Richard and I are talking in the same ornate library where the mayor promoted Oliveira.
The chief.
Really? Is this hard?
Richard points out the window.
The black Suburban, I was going by that. Black Suburban at the lights, 5-digit plates, so in case you guys are ever out just looking around. But
holy shit.
Yeah, so,
It's a little eerie. We're talking about Oliveira, and he suddenly appears, as if on command, like he's everywhere. According to Richard, the key to Oliveira's early success was his manipulation of C.I.s.
You live and die in this business on informants, essentially, and information.
And my investigation has found that Oliveira misused the C.I. system, and according to his colleagues, broke the law, paving the way for others to do the same.
It changed the informant playbook in terms of what was allowed in terms of controlling an informant.
And in the 90s, New Bedford's drug unit was going sideways.
Things just had gotten to the point of no control, really, where you could see that the corruption level was just fucking off the hook. It really was.
I'm Dugan Arnett, And from the Boston Globe Spotlight team, this is Snitch City. Episode 3, The Chief.
Hey, how's it going?
Sorry, it took a little longer than I
No worries.
Bobby Richard works in private security today, but he was with the New Bedford police for almost 25 years. He's not the big bruiser type I pictured in my mind. He's kind of quiet, thoughtful.
The things that we talk about, I was directly involved in, I saw, I was aware of, I was told, not things that are hearsay.
Richard and Oliveira met in 1992.
New Bedford's a small enough place where I went to the police academy with Paul. We knew each other.
What was your first impression of him?
Confident, right? Above average in terms of, I think, comprehension for, what we're getting into.
They start on the lowest rung, working street patrol. Oliveira with a college degree in criminal justice, a rarity that sets him apart. And almost immediately, he makes an impact.
He had a high level of, interaction and stops and arrests and some fairly successful ones. So it set him above, the people at the time that they were considering. He was a rising star as a patrol officer and all that stuff.
As patrol officers, Richard and Oliveira learn to cultivate informants. Typically, it's drug users or sex workers. But Richard didn't want to be a street cop forever.
So just about 3.5 years, and then, I was looking to take the next step.
And so was Oliveira. They both wanted more action, more responsibility, more prestige. They wanted to be in narcotics.
You had to be chosen. At the time, it was only 12 detectives that worked in there. It was a highly coveted position.
Bobby Richard and Paul Oliveira were promoted to the drug unit on the same day in 1996.
And then thus began the journey.
This was the 1990s, the height of America's war on drugs. And there was a lot of work to do.
Today, the streets are even more dangerous than you think. So talk to your kids about drugs, or somebody else will.
Then President Bill Clinton was throwing billions at the problem.
We put more police on the streets and taking criminals, guns, and drugs off the streets. But we're a long way from my vision of a drug-free America.
The money and the mission trickled down to New Bedford, a major trafficking port. At the docks, so-called dirty boats were offloading huge shipments after dark. Cocaine and heroin coursed through the motorcycle clubs and seedy waterfront bars. For New Bedford's narcotics unit, the objective was simple: make cases, get drugs. And they were given lots of leeway to do that. They came and went as they pleased, dressed in plain clothes, and drove flashy cars seized from local dealers. It was exciting.
We would focus on hot areas, if there was rampant, dealing, we'd set up surveillance and all that stuff. We would work with, outside agencies, like the DEA, which was, something that was pretty cool for, a city kid.
Without informants, none of their work would have been possible. Richard says working a drug case without a CI is like walking into a casino and betting solely on a hunch.
And you're like, this machine looks good and I'm going to keep putting money in it until it hits, and it doesn't happen,
The more Richard worked with C.I.s, the more he realized how shady it was. So much of it was off the books, and everything hinged on the word and integrity of police.
It's about credibility is what it is, because people make up informants, right? So I could tell you that Dugan Arnett is my informant, but he might not even exist.
And when it came to informants, Paul Oliveira was a superstar.
When he came into the unit, he had an abundance of informants. He had low-level informants, medium-level informants, some upper-level people and all that stuff and everything. So it was a magic carpet ride for Paul.
Oliveira's former supervisor told me he was, quote, the cock of the walk. Others call him genius or god.
Paul had an infallible luck streak.
Big cases, huge numbers. He made the department and himself look good.
I compare it to, going out and hitting a home run every time you're at the plate. You stand there and you swing, and every ball's going over the fence. The sheer joy of it knowing that you're going to be able to do that, but also everything that goes on around that. You're rounding the bases, and everybody's clapping for you, and the announcers are talking about you, and it's on the highlight reels and all that stuff. And I remember the boss used to have a reference to Paul. He's like, he's the winning horse. He's winning all the races right now. We're just going to fucking ride him. We're going to ride him. Fucking everybody jump on. We're just going to ride him.
Everyone benefited, including Richard.
He certainly took advantage of the fact that this guy was doing cases like crazy and bringing in numbers and bringing in money and bringing in, positive media and all that stuff and everything. It was just a win-win.
But there was a moment when Richard did start to wonder, how was Oliveira doing all this? To stick with the baseball analogy,
this guy could go out and hit a home run every time. It's just impossible, right? Until people figured out how and why and what was taking place.
The secret behind Paul Oliveira's unprecedented success comes into focus for Bobby Richard in the winter of 1997.
I remember that the DEA had been set up on this particular house for the longest time, about a year and a half trying to do it, and they never could do it.
The house is notorious, not far from the regional airport and the home base of a high-level Colombian drug dealer. Nobody, not even federal agents, have been able to penetrate this drug operation. But Oliveira, less than 18 months into his narcotics gig, has something no one else does. An informant with direct intel about the place, which Oliveira parlays into a search warrant.
I remember Paul doing a pre-raid briefing for this house and being, holy Christ, this is this place, you know what I mean?
The raid goes down on a brisk December day, a week before Christmas.
We did it in the afternoon. I remember it was like noontime, 1 o'clock and all that stuff. The plan was to wait for the guy to leave the house.
Oliveira's informant says the drugs are hidden in the kitchen, in the range hood above the stove.
And lo and behold, we pulled it down. There was a half a kilo back there. We're talking 500 grams, half a kilo. Already a great hit, right?
News reports said the cocaine they found was extremely pure. A half a kilo of it could have been worth upwards of $100,000.
We ended up wrapping up the raid and go back to the station. Everybody gets booked.
Richard and his whole team feel good about how things worked out. They'd taken half a kilo of coke off the street and put a major dealer behind bars.
I come in the next day and his news media truck's out in front of the station.
It was a good bust, but Richard is surprised by so much attention.
I'm like, what the fuck is going on? So I go up to the office and the bosses are up there, the chief's up there.
And in another room, bricks of cocaine are arranged on a large table, along with a nest of microphones.
We had a press conference, the whole fucking dog and pony show and all that stuff.
Richard asks, what's going on?
And they're like, oh, you didn't hear? Paul got 4 kilos in a case last night.
He thinks, 4 kilos? When the raid ended, they'd only found half a kilo. He was there. He took part. Richard pulls Oliveira aside.
I asked him, I said, so what happened?
Oliveira tells him that after everyone left the scene that night, he got another call from his informant. There was more cocaine in the house. The detectives had missed it.
He said, well, it ended up that the kilos were up in the attic.
The informant told Oliveira that he went up there to get the rest.
And they bundled them up, put them in a garbage bag, and brought them down the end of the dead-end street and threw them in the woods.
Oliveira then drove back to the house and found the drugs. And that's how this bust went from good to historic. Oliveira's informant delivered big time. The bust was a record haul for New Bedford police. But Richard says what most people didn't know is that Oliveira cut his informant in on the deal. In exchange for his help finding those extra kilos of coke, Oliveira let the informant keep a kilo for himself.
Got a kilo. That's a hell of a reward, huh? For an informant, you know what I mean?
Who told you that story? Like, who told you what happened?
Paul did himself. Yeah, directly.
What Richard is saying is that Oliveira let his CI keep and sell a kilo of cocaine. I know, this is a serious accusation, but I've dug into this, and I found 2 other people with direct knowledge of this investigation. And independently, they told the same story. To be clear, Oliveira has never been charged with a crime or disciplined by the department. I wanted to speak to him directly, but he denied my interview requests. I asked specific questions about this raid, but they were ignored. Some might argue that the ends justify the means, that Oliveira could be justified in letting a kilo or so slip to a dealer in exchange for getting more kilos off the street. But not only does it run counter to the objective of drug enforcement, it's also illegal. According to Richard and these other sources, Oliveira lied in police reports, pushed a false story, and let a known dealer keep a lot of drugs. And he was able to do this because he used the words confidential informant. Doing so allowed all of this alleged misconduct to go unquestioned. For Richard, this case marked a major turning point. Richard certainly didn't consider himself a saint. Like any successful drug cop, he often navigated policing's gray areas. But he says there was no gray area in this case.
And I remember a couple of days later, the lieutenant was so fucking taken with him. He went out and there's a picture of him sitting behind, the drugs are all spread on the table and the cash and all. He took a picture of him. He had it blown up to like 16 by fucking 20 and had it framed and brought it in and gave it to Paul. He was so proud of him, right? And I'm sitting there, I'm like, holy fuck, man. This is how far we've come.
The official story was that, quote, good, hard police work was behind it all.
Biggest case in New Bedford drug narcotics history, right? At the time. It was all fucking bullshit. It was all completely bullshit.
Hi, it's me again, Brendan McCarthy, editor of the Globe Spotlight team. We're halfway through, and there's a lot more coming. And remember, if you want to stay up to date on all the latest, you need to subscribe to Spotlight Snitch City on your favorite podcast app, or follow the link in the description below.
When you start getting into this vice, narcotics, undercover world, it is shadowy. It is underground.
Lance Block is a Florida-based attorney who's fought to change the way police are allowed to use confidential informants. He says the kind of alleged misconduct I've been telling you about isn't unique to New Bedford.
It's a game to a lot of these police officers. And to win, they have to think like the criminal. And they start acting like the criminal. And so you see behavior and decision-making that is not what you would expect from people who wear the badge with integrity.
Bobby Richard says he saw it firsthand, admits to taking part in some of it himself. But he says that Paul Oliveira took it to the extreme.
He was reinventing the wheel, so to speak.
From his perspective, the raid on the high-level Colombian dealer changed things.
It's testing the waters is what it is. If you do it wrong the first time you get away with it, you try it again, right? If you realize that you can subjugate the rules by taking a risk and doing something incorrect, sloppy, or illegal, and you've gotten away with it, then you do it again, or you're prone to do it again, right?
Richard and other sources told me that's essentially what happened. And soon, Oliveira became known for a particular tactic, something called a setup case.
He got into doing these cases where he was controlling both ends of the process.
Setup cases were allegedly Oliveira's specialty. And here's how they work. They require a cop to essentially partner with a drug dealer.
The dealer brings the drugs to the house. It's put in the safe. Hold this for me. He goes back to Paul and tells him it's good to go. There's 250 grams of cocaine in the house and all that stuff and everything.
What you're saying is he was arranging to have the drugs put in the target location that he would then execute the raid at.
Over and over and over, yeah.
Richard isn't my only source on this. Another former drug detective said the same thing. I was even able to speak with one of Oliveira's former informants. And they all said that the secret to Oliveira's success was forming alliances with mid-level dealers and allowing them to stay in business in exchange for giving up lower-level guys.
So one mid-level dealer can fetch you a dozen low-level dealers because of the way that it breaks down. You take 500 grams of powder cocaine and you push that out to 10 dealers, 50 grams at a time.
Then, that mid-level dealer acts as an informant and offers up a handful of names.
You're that mid-level informant and you say that this guy's dealing, this guy's dealing, this guy's dealing, and it's just a matter of time until you start rounding them up. The mid-level dealer doesn't care because he'll get new distributors as the process goes on. He's only giving you the guys that he wants to fuck, for lack of a better terminology. But he'll give you those guys because it sustains his ability to be able to go out there and deal at the level he's doing. We used to call it a license to deal.
A license to deal.
Because you think that you have the blessing to do it. Think about it, you get the best of both worlds. You're a drug dealer who has the advocacy of one of the top police detectives in the jurisdiction that you live in.
It turns the standard police playbook on its head. In drug cases, police want to go up the chain. Flip a user for a dealer, then a dealer for a supplier. Get the biggest fish. But what Richard and others are saying is that Oliveira did it the other way around. He was content to let the bigger fish stay in business so long as he could get the smaller ones and keep making headline-grabbing busts.
Whenever you can dictate the circumstances behind how something's going to come out, it's usually going to come out in your favor.
It was all getting to be too much for Richard, and he was beginning to worry about his own exposure.
It's always in the back of your mind, like, I know this is going on, right? And I'm part of the problem too. By allowing it to happen and all that stuff, I'm culpable. I participated, and I knew that, that's just stuff that was going on is illegal. Things just had gotten to the point of no control, really, where you could see that the corruption level was just fucking off the hook. It really was.
Around this time, corruption within the city's police force was becoming impossible to ignore. An outside audit found that 20% of New Bedford officers believed their colleagues were stealing drugs or money from local dealers. Meanwhile, agents from the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration reported that the informant situation in New Bedford had grown dire. One DEA agent said the city was on the doorstep of another, quote, Whitey Bulger incident, referencing the South Boston mobster who committed heinous crimes with the protection of his FBI handler. Richard decided he didn't want to be part of this anymore. He wanted to distance himself from Oliveira.
We're no longer openly friendly with each other. We didn't do stuff to piss him off, and we were like ships in the night.
Eventually, both men left the drug unit and went their separate ways. But years later, their paths crossed again. In 2010, Richard was charged with assault and battery. And by this point, Oliveira was part of the department's internal affairs unit. IA investigated Richard, and he says Oliveira led the probe.
That's the point where our relationship got most frictious. Our relationship pivoted at that point. I felt that he went out of his way to investigate me from an internal affairs level.
The criminal case against Richard was dismissed, but the department's inquiry resulted in discipline, and Richard was demoted. But things truly came to a head 5 years later.
The final straw came, this whole issue with smoking.
Despite everything he saw, everything he took part in, the thing that ended Richard's decades-long career with the New Bedford Police Department was a cigar.
The rule was you could not smoke whatsoever.
The rule is still on the books today.
It's one strike rule. If you catch me with a cigarette or cigar, it's immediately fireable.
According to Richard, when Oliveira found a video of him with a cigar on duty, he had enough to get him fired.
I think I'm one of 3 people in the state of Massachusetts lost their job for smoking. And I think it was that he wanted me completely out of the picture because of the stuff that I know. I can't think of any other reason, to be honest with you.
I asked if Paul Oliveira had ever investigated or disciplined another officer for smoking, but he didn't respond, other than to note that he was not chief when Richard was fired, and thus the ultimate decision to terminate Richard wasn't his. The city of New Bedford said Richard was fired for a number of violations and matters, including the cigar, and it noted that the case went to an arbitrator who agreed with the decision. Either way, a cigar was part of Bobby's ultimate undoing. And yet, I found that Oliveira, as chief or deputy chief, oversaw officers accused of much more serious misdeeds. In many of those cases, the officers either received minimal discipline or were allowed to resign before discipline was handed down.
So I want to ensure that every single police officer is obeying the law, respecting people's civil rights, and constitutional rights.
Oliveira isn't talking to me, but he's been asked by others about police misconduct. In this interview, he's responding to a question about officers in his department making mistakes.
To assure that. I'm not going to sit here today and tell you, I know every single one of my police officers does done right 100% of the time, every single time. Police officers are human beings. They make mistakes. We got to hold them accountable when they make mistakes. But to think that there's some gross negligence out there occurring on the city streets, I don't buy into that.
Bobby Richard is perplexed at the hypocrisy. And he says there are even bigger consequences to consider. Much of the information that police gather from C.I.s is used in court as evidence. But if the underlying evidence is bad or false, how many cases could be tainted? How deep does the rot go? Pretty deep, according to Richard and another source I spoke with. There's another member of the same drug unit who saw the same things and feels the same way.
We're in a parking lot just over the bridge in Fairhaven. An empty parking lot. No one around.
My producer Max and I met this man late one night in an isolated parking lot, underneath a bridge, a town over from New Bedford. It was dark out, foggy. It felt like the perfect setting for a clandestine meeting with an off-the-record source, which is what this was. We talked to him about setup cases, about the manipulation of informants, and the practice of collaborating with drug dealers.
We need to get him to put his name to some of this stuff. And
tonight you were really pushing him about getting on the record.
Yeah.
But he refused to go on the record. He believes members of the police department, under Oliveira's command, will target his family.
I mean, he said, my fear is my kids get pulled over and suddenly these cops are planting drugs on them.
Right. And you want to be like, that's crazy. That's insane. But then it's the thing that if I was in his shoes that I would be worried about is how could this come back on my family?
And there's something else I haven't told you. Something that ties this source and Richard together. Both have been contacted by the FBI and asked about Oliveira. Richard said the phone call came out of the blue, around 2017.
I mean, I met him in the Dunkin' Donuts in Freetown, for Christ's sakes, and he was true to form. He came in, unmarked vehicle, and he was wearing a fucking trench coat, and I'm like, Jesus, I know who you are. This guy stuck out like a sore thumb. He was FBI all day long, you know what I mean?
The agent is from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit.
Did they ask about Paul?
Specifically, yeah.
And Richard says he tells him everything he knows.
Questions had come up about some of the processes, informants, people that he was working with. And then we went back to, the foundation to paint a history of corruption, right? Where it was a continuous process with him. It had been going on, for a decade, 10, 12, 14 years and all that stuff.
Did you walk away from that hopeful that something was gonna...
I swear to God, I thought that, the feds would pull up outside of his house one day and lock him up and that would be it.
And it just never happened?
Never happened, no. I think that it's categorically insane that this has been going on this long and that no federal agency can put pieces of the puzzle together.
Richard says the FBI actually contacted him twice within the last decade, asking about Oliveira, as recently as 2022. But after those initial conversations, he didn't hear another word. And that really pisses him off.
I want to see the fucking feds drive up on this guy's lawn and lock him up, getting in his Suburban one morning. I really do. I think that that's the only way that this would bring closure to it for a lot of people.
After the Globe published this story online, the city issued a statement saying Paul Oliveira, quote, has no knowledge of a formal request by either the FBI or the Department of Justice in this regard. Whatever the FBI was investigating, it appears to have gone nowhere, which is odd, considering something else I've uncovered. The FBI actually started asking questions about the New Bedford police and Paul Oliveira 25 years ago.
We were all just pissed off that they were so crooked and they could get away with it. So we were like, how can we let people know?
That's next time on Spotlight, Snitch City. Spotlight, Snitch City is reported and hosted by me, Dugan Arnett. Additional reporting by Andrew Ryan and Brendan McCarthy. The podcast is written by Max Green and Kristen Nelson, along with me and Brendan McCarthy. Max Green is senior producer. Executive producers are Spotlight editor Brendan McCarthy and Kristen Nelson, the Globe's head of audio. Additional editing and support from Gordon Russell and Kathleen Goldhar. Nancy Barnes is the Boston Globe's executive editor. Sound design and mix by Stephen Jackson. Episode artwork by Julian D. Paulson. Art direction by Ryan Huddle. Podcast visualization by Olivia Yarvis and Anush Elbakian. Heather Cyrus is the audience editor. Tim Rasmussen is visuals editor. Legal review by John Albano. Fact-checking by Matt Mahoney. Marketing support for this podcast comes from The Podglomerate.